Okay, so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Maggie Birchall, and I'm going to let Maggie introduce herself. But it's all yours, Maggie.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mallory. So I feel lucky I actually get to see some of you. I thought I was just going to be looking at myself. So that's great. And okay, I'm just so happy to be here tonight. I love doing this family work. I teach prevention education in the schools. I started in Connecticut, do some work in New York, and now I'm in Miami. But recently I've been doing some of the family work with Mallory, and I love it. So I have that background. I have my master's in counseling psychology, and I've been a teacher for years, but I also work my own recovery. There's addiction in my family, and so this is very near and dear to my heart. So I want to stay on script here. I have a tendency to go off script, but I don't want to. And I'd like to cover these three issues. How does addiction affect the family? What is family recovery and why is it important? And the most important for me are tools to take away. So this is a huge topic. And in my mind, these webinars are all family recovery. What is family recovery? And it's taken me a while, or it took me a while to understand family recovery. So if you're brand new to this and this whole concept, it's kind of a concept. I'm going to take on an angle that is very important to me in family recovery, but you'll hear from many of us, and there are so many different angles. Also, I want to say, just in case I don't give people credit, almost all of this information I have learned from other people. And I'd like to give a shout out to the Westport Support Group, which I am a member of. I used to facilitate, and I've learned so much from my fellow parents and that in Westport, it's also an alum group. And I've learned so much from people, and I am simply hoping to be of service tonight and pass on what I've learned from both my colleagues and also just the people who I walk this journey with. So to begin, addiction is only affecting one person in the family, but really it's affecting the whole family. The whole family suffers. And this is just a short list of how people are affected by addiction. So there's one addict, but so much of the attention goes to the dependent, the user. And I'm going to use these words interchangeably. Substance use disorder, the dependent, the addict, and I'll just weave those in and out. Unmet developmental needs, that's often for the children of an addict. Impaired attachment. Again, I want to remind everybody that I am not a clinician. So some of these things a clinician could take an entire webinar talking about, but I'm just touching on these things. And if you're interested, definitely email us and we can help you get more information about these things. Economic hardship. I think those of us who have sent loved ones to treatment centers know how expensive that is. Also, the expense that it comes along with legal problems, emotional distress, sometimes violence. I also want to add, and I remember actually it was Mallory's webinar, she mentioned this, and I know others of us have mentioned this, that there's addiction and there's also mental illness. They so often go hand in hand. In my family, we actually have a child who has a very serious mental illness. Addiction isn't part of his story, but my recovery is often around him as well. I will weave my experience, strength, and hope into this talk. But this really isn't about me. It's just sometimes I have examples at my fingertips because of my own family. So these are just some of the family roles. And actually, back when I was getting my degree in psychology, I remember learning about these roles in just a family. Forget a family with addiction, but this was through the lens of addiction. So there's the dependent. There's the enabler, who is also known as the caretaker. And the caretaker takes on so much of the burden. The caretaker often feels like they're responsible for the pain and struggles of the dependent. The caretaker often has a hard time maintaining healthy boundaries. And the caretaker slash enabler has a lot of enabling behaviors. I want to say this, I might repeat myself about this again and again. There is no judgment here. I mean, no judgment. I just find this stuff interesting. In my family, I know that I am enabling sometimes. I know that I can also, at my family of origin, I could have been the mascot a little bit. Like, there's no judgment. These are coping mechanisms that work for a while. Just like for the addict, his substance or her substance works for a while to cope with something they're not dealing with in a healthy way. But after a while, all of these roles sort of break down and end up harming the person. So the hero brings esteem to the families, often an older child who is a very high achiever and is trying to make the family look like it's healthy and normal and okay. The scapegoat is the easy child to blame, the problem child, acting out. The lost child might just be sort of under the radar, more neglected, just left out because all the energy is on the dependent, who may be a parent or maybe another sibling. The mascot is sort of the clown, uses humor all the time. And, people can think, oh, that child is so easy. He's just always making me laugh. But actually, that's a big burden. After a while, that's a big burden. And all these roles take attention away from the loved one. It's a way of saying, oh, it's a way of protecting the dependent in a lot of ways. So the caretaker is one I want to talk about a little bit more. It's a lot to carry. And I don't want to make any assumptions, but I'm guessing if you're here listening to this, you might be that role in your family. And you may or may not be. So I credit you with educating yourself about this and having an open mind, and realizing I'm not judging at all, but the enabler is often the people pleaser and will make excuses and smooths over conflict. So on this slide, I don't want to read all of these, but when I read this, I was like, oh my gosh, it just sometimes these things hit in different ways. But you routinely do things for a loved one that they can do for themselves. I mean, in my mind, that's sort of like parenting 101, right? And it's hard to shift. You consistently put your loved one's needs before your own. And this is something that's really important to me to talk about. And later on in the juice of my talk, I want to talk about how sort of not to do that, or how important it is not to do that. You feel responsible for your loved one's life choices and problems. You feel resentment towards your loved one because you're working harder than they are. And that's a really important one. You're afraid to let your loved one fail and to get into trouble. So those are just some that highlighted. So this is a slide from our colleague, Sarah Martinez. And if you may have seen her webinar, it's called In Thin Ice, and she does a beautiful job. But this is just a very powerful slide of these behaviors, enabling especially, can lead us here, which is out on the thin ice with our loved one, instead of being more effective and helping our loved one from afar. We don't want to be there. So addiction is a chronic disease, like obesity, like diabetes, like heart, lung, and liver disease. It's ongoing. And when somebody is never cured of these diseases, right? They're just in recovery. They're just managed. And so here's what recovery is. once a person gets sober, they still have to manage all this stuff. They're still living their life with this disease, just like diabetes. And if they don't take care of their diabetes, it's going to come back in a bad way and can lead them to death. So recovery is a daily practice. So this is for the user, but this is also for family members. And I would like to make a plug for the 12 steps series, because those 12 steps are so powerful for family members as well. It's a way of practicing your new behaviors, because the way that I or you or any one of us, the way that family members relate to a user while they're actively using is one thing. But then if the user gets into recovery and the family is not changing their behavior or their relationships toward the person in recovery, it's going to be much harder for that person to recover. And from my perspective, it's going to be much harder for you family members to move forward into a lighter life, not the pain, not the sorrow. So we want to move away from that. It is a daily practice. Am I moving toward this light, or am I moving, or if I'm going back into my old behaviors? So I just said all this. The family members have their own recovery. This is important to know that it's separate from everyone else's. I have a chuckle about this because I thought, oh, I know. I'm going to interview my family members about what they think recovery is. What do they think family recovery is? Okay, so we have an addict in our family. We have actually several addicts, uncles, different family members, a child, and then we also have a child with a severe mental illness. And I asked some of my family members, what do you think family recovery is? And they were like, what do you mean? What are you talking about? So even in my family where I do this work and I thought I talked about it all the time, there is a lot of people don't understand that we have our own recovery separate from the dependent. I wanted to quote, so it's really important to know that family recovery looks different in every family and in every family member. And what works for me or what works for you may not work for your spouse or your child. And one of the tenets of recovery is that I need to work my recovery, not anybody else's, including my family members. Forget about the dependent. We all often want to sort of recover for our dependent, our loved one who's really in trouble, and they have to work their own recovery, but also in our family. So when a couple of my family members said, what are you talking about? What's family recovery? I wanted to school them and say, what are you talking? We have to change the way we're acting. You need to do this. You need to do this. But that's the behavior I can't do. I can only work my own recovery. So we're recovering from old patterns, and we're learning new ways to relate. So my next slide is just sort of a side note, and this is an important concept and an important thing to understand the difference. There's family involvement and there's family recovery. And I think this can be confusing to families who are new to recovery. So they have done studies on how people who have an SUD actually do so much better when their families are involved. So intervening in a crisis. So maybe they need an intervention and the family comes together and does that. Family members might help find treatment options. Studies show that family involvement lowers chances of relapse. we work very closely with the psychiatrist who works with our son, and he's at a hospital in Connecticut called Silver Hill. He's wonderful, and he has been doing these long-term studies of the patients who do, how the patients are doing. And he said, we've just found that the patients who have families who are involved do better. But this is such a fine line. So you can read these. I don't need to read these out loud to you, but I added this last line. So this came from a website that I referenced here at the bottom, but you cannot save your loved one. So yes, involvement's good, but the boundaries around what kind of involvement you're giving are really important. Oh, and by the way, Mallory, I cannot see the chat. So if there are pertinent questions that come up that might really be good for me to answer in the middle, I'm fine to do that. All right. So why is your recovery important? This is one of my favorite slides. Whoops. And it makes me sad. I'm guessing that most of you are familiar with The Giving Tree, the book, and it's heartbreaking, but it's about a tree who's kind of like a mother, right? And the boy is always asking for, you know, apples and more and more and more. And the quote here that's too small for you to read says, and she loved her boy very, very much, even more than she loved herself. And in the end, she has nothing more to give. She's a stump. And it almost always makes me cry to think of that, what mothers do. And when I look at this, I think, I do not want to be a stump. And I've even said that to my kids before, like, okay, giving tree much? Like, I think it's really important that we advocate for ourselves and make sure that we give what we can, we're intervening when we can, but when we need to fill our own bucket, we really do that. So that's why family recovery is so important. The stress that those of us who live with addicts have is intense, and we all know that. I don't need to explain that to you. So one of the things that I love, one of the slogans I love in recovery is put your own oxygen mask on first, and then you can help somebody else. So just like when you're on the plane. The path of recovery, you probably, or maybe you've seen this. I've seen this before, and I really love it. It's maybe what you think it's going to be like for your loved one. And now that some of you may be like old, you know, you totally get family recovery. So I'm sorry if I'm talking to you like you don't know, but I think some people might be new. So this is the path you might think your newly sober loved one is going to lead. Like, in time, they are just going to be awesome, and this is great. But what really is going to happen is more like the squiggle. This is true for families as well. So I'm working my own recovery in my relationship with my dependent and also other people in my family who I was relating to in maybe an unhealthy way because of the trauma we were going through, because of what was happening. But when I come to a point which might be one of these low points on that graph to the right, I have to remember to zoom out and that we're trending in the right direction. Just trending in the right direction. This is not perfection. This is just progress. Okay, so Kathy, who may or may not be on this webinar, is a member of the Westport support group, and she told me that I could share this story with her, which I thought was great. And I'm just going to read it just as she wrote it to me, because they're her words. She says, when I returned from the family program in Pennsylvania, while Max was at Caron, I began attending weekly Nar-Anon meetings in San Diego. After Max's 30 days at Caron, he transferred to Serenity Sober Living in New York City for 2 months. Not long after Max got to Serenity, I was told that he had lost his cell phone, and I immediately started freaking out about not being able to reach him or him being able to reach me. How could this happen? I was terrified and spinning, so worried that he had relapsed. At the next Nar-Anon meeting, I was sharing this story with the group. And after I was done, one of the parents said to me, Kathy, you relapsed. I was shocked. I could not wrap my head around the concept of relapse pertaining in any way to me. Relapse is such a terrifying word to hear, as we all know. That moment was so powerful, and I would say that it truly opened my eyes, and I started to learn about my own recovery from Max's addiction. So she had her own recovery to Max's addiction. The years of enabling, worrying, and denial, I had a lot to learn. And then she writes, Max recovered his phone and he had not relapsed. So that was her story, but it speaks for itself. This is another slide that I borrowed from Dr. Margaret King, who is supervisor of trauma services at Caron. You guys may have seen this. This is the slide. And again, I am not a neuropsychiatrist, psychologist. I'm not a neurologist in any way, but Mallory and I and our colleagues do teach a lot about the brain and the development of the brain when we're talking to students. But I thought this was so interesting to think about in terms of the dependent, the user, and also in terms of those of us who are in close relationship with that loved one. So this is a traumatized brain. Something happens, and instead of the arrows going up into the prefrontal cortex, which is logic and planning, and it's sort of your more mature part of your brain that is integrated with the rest of your brain and can really make good decisions, right away, we go into the fear of this is not safe, and stress hormones are released, and then we go into fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. And fawn, for those of you who don't know, because that's a little bit newer, is like this immediate reaction to be like apologetic, I'm sorry, smooth it over, and just sort of take on the, like, it's my fault. And I can relate with all of these, the fight, the flight, the freeze, and the fawn. So this, and Mallory and I were talking about this earlier today, is like when you have flipped your lid. We talk about this with the kids, and we show them a little our fist is our brain, and when I'm not thinking clearly, I have flipped my lid, meaning my prefrontal cortex is offline, and I am just straight into, from the trigger into like, whoa, I'm frozen. And for Kathy's story, she was just she was freaking out. That's the fifth F, freaking out. So what we want, oh shoot, hang on. Oh, it's not, oh, there we go. Okay, what we want is this. We want a regulated brain so that when something happens, it goes through the proper channels so that we do something thoughtful. Okay, so this is equanimity, and this is where we want to be. And you might say, how do we get there? And that's what I'm hoping the rest of my talk is to help you with. I want you tonight just to leave with one or two new ways of, one or two new tools actually to use in order to get to this, because this regulated brain makes our relationships with the dependent better, and it makes our relationships with everyone better, with ourselves better. It's healthier for our brain, it's healthier for our body. And it's simply learning how to respond instead of react. And a lot of times, like if you talk about addiction, a lot of times the trigger just leads the addict to just react and go into using. But some of us, we might not be alcoholic or drug addict, but we might have a behavior that is the same thing, where we're just responding, not responding, we're just reacting, and it's unhealthy, and it causes so much stress in our relationships, and our relationships is sort of, that's everything for me. That's what family recovery is to me, is creating these better, healthier, more loving, kind relationships. So this is another concept that's really important to me in my life and in my family recovery, and I hope to you. So a lot of times I have the feeling that family members are completely overwhelmed. So why in the world would I start doing something more? All I can do is get through the day. I can't do anything more. But I would like to flip that. I sometimes like to think of my life as a canvas, like an artist's canvas. And it's messy, but it's also beautiful. It's all these different things. Life is full of all these different experiences. And when I am consumed with my loved ones' huge problems, it feels like it's blotting out the canvas of my life. It's blotting out all of the beauty, all of the peace, all of the joy, and it's just can be black. So that's why it's imperative to actually add more. And the paradox is, when I add more, it makes space. I don't know how, I don't know why, but it makes space. So this is the fun part of the talk, I hope. These are my suggestions. I hope that you take a deeper dive and do some things that work for you, for your recovery, but I will share some of mine. So incremental goals. Incremental goals are small, they're repetitive, and they're habitual. So I don't want to, so there's sleep. For me, this is the core: sleep, food, exercise, gratitude, and connection. So I want to sleep 8 hours a night, but I don't want to. I know so many people are like, are you kidding me? I can't sleep 8 hours a night, blah, 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 and the wall goes up. And also, it's too big of a goal. What a person can do is say, I'm going to get into my pajamas at 10 o'clock. I'm going to drink some calming tea, at 9 o'clock. So I can't control how much I sleep, because I might have so much anxiety I can't sleep, but I can control what I do around my sleep with a small, repetitive, habitual goal. Okay, so your sleep goal, you have to figure these out, what work for you. Food is also really important. I think, if I'm stressed out and I'm just eating fast food and just putting in whatever I can put into my body, it's not going to work. I need to be mindful in what I'm eating and eating food that makes me feel good. Exercise. I don't mean just like, oh, I need to exercise more. I'm going to go exercise for 45 minutes every day. No, I just mean move my body. I need to move my body. There's another great slogan, which is move a muscle, change a thought. So back to the canvas being blotted out by all this stress, anxiety, fear, worry about our loved one. I often think, just move a muscle, change a thought. I'm not doing any good right now, freaking out. I need to go out for a walk, even if it's just around the block. I have a gratitude practice. They have done so much research on gratitude. They've shown that gratitude brings us back to the present moment. And this is a part of the magic of mindfulness. I don't know why, but when human beings' brains are doing the same thing their bodies are doing, they're in the moment, they're connected, human beings are happier. So if I'm sitting on the sidelines of my child's game and my mind starts to wander, even if it's wandering in a really good way, but I'm not watching the game, I'm thinking about a vacation or I'm planning it or something, then I start stressing out, getting anxious, and I'm anxious. Or I go back into the past and I might get sad, but gratitude brings me right into this moment. And gratitude doesn't have to be big. Gratitude can be, I'm grateful for my pillow. I'm grateful that I have hot running water. Just the littlest things can make the biggest difference. I have a gratitude practice with a friend. I text her every single day, 3 things I'm grateful for. And it, even no matter how dark the day is, no matter how hard it is, it brings me into the moment and makes me realize, like, oh, things are okay. I heard Brene Brown talking about this, about gratitude. I can't even remember which talk it was. I love Brene Brown, and but she said something like, "Oh, my kids are so great." Like this feeling sometimes of like loving somebody in our family, like, "Oh my gosh, I just love my sister so much. She's so great. Oh my gosh, someday she's going to die," and then whoop, spinning, and you go down. It's actually terrifying to me how quickly that can happen. But if we stop those thoughts and go straight to, I'm grateful. I'm grateful I have a really nice relationship with my sister. And it can, and the gratitude, I know it sounds cheesy, but it can get smaller and smaller and smaller, because sometimes people are struggling so much that it's hard to find things to be grateful for. But I promise you, the more, well, I should speak for myself, but the more I practice it, the easier it is for me. And connection. This is, I'm going to talk more about later, but connection with the people I love is very important. And I cannot say enough about a support group. Find a support group that you like. It may or may not be Al-Anon. It could be one of the Caron support groups. It can be one that has nothing to do with Caron. There are addiction support groups that are so helpful and so wonderful. It's just a problem shared is a problem divided. I'm not alone. It's interesting. I know that at the beginning I was so resistant. I'm up to here with therapy. I'm up to here with groups. I don't want to do it, but it's, I suggest that you try it and find one that you like, and just try it for several weeks or months, and then make a decision about it. Okay, so I love this concept. My computer is so sensitive. Of SMART goals, which you may or may not know about. But here is what a SMART goal is. It's specific, it's measurable, it's attainable, so it's realistic. And the R, whenever I'm teaching this, I actually say the R should be a reward. Like we get to reward ourselves for attaining the goal. Relevant, I just sort of, I don't know if it has to be relevant. It just has to make you feel good. And time-based, so there's a deadline. So again, the goal is not, I need to exercise more. I'm going to exercise more. No, here's an example of a goal. And I mean to make them really, really small, because when I attain the goal, I feel really good about attaining it. If I make the goal too big and I don't attain it, it's like, I did it again. It's just like New Year's resolutions. So an example of one is, I will walk for 15 minutes on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and I'm going to do it for 2 weeks. That's it. 15 minutes, 3 days a week. No guilt on your off days, so you can feel really good about that. And at 2 weeks, you've made that goal, and then you can either add on to it or choose a different goal. But these in and of themselves make you feel good. Just attaining the goal makes you feel good. We work with kids with nicotine cessation, like they're vaping. We're trying to help them quit, and these little goals made the kids feel so good. Like, just don't vape in your car. That can be one of your goals for this week, and then next week it will not be vaping in your car or your bedroom. So those teeny tiny small goals can make such a difference. Okay. And next slide. Healthy communication. I find these I statements to be extremely helpful in all of my relationships. when I am upset, when we are upset, and maybe, you know, our lid is flipped, there's a lot of you need to do this. I'm so mad. You did this, you did that. And no matter if you're right and the person did do those things and the person is wrong, you are going to put the person in a defensive position. I've never ever heard of somebody who's getting yelled at like, you did this, you did that. I never have I seen a person say, oh, you know what, you're right, I'm so sorry. Right? It just doesn't work like that. But I have found, and I do this now, I really try to practice this. I've done this with my husband when I'm so frustrated, but I can say, I feel so frustrated when you blah, 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 because blah, 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 whatever it is. And there's actually nothing for the person to argue with because you are simply saying your feelings. There's nothing to argue with. And it's come to that before. I've seen that where it's like, I am just telling you how I feel. That's it. And that I find to be really a powerful tool. Again, these are daily practices. Maybe you just want to pick one tool that you're going to try, maybe for 2 weeks. One tool, maybe it's a gratitude list. It doesn't have to be all of these things. I do not want to overwhelm anybody. These are just things that I've learned along the way and I want to pass on. So I love this: pause, breathe, proceed. That's the regulated brain. That's equanimity. Just like pause and ask that one question. What do I need right now? What do I need to do right now? Maybe it's nothing. Maybe it's get a drink of water. Maybe it's leave the toxic situation. But it's pretty much never get heated and really get involved and get crazy and freak out. We can say that for sure. And healthy boundaries. This is one of my favorite slides too. So I like this quote: walls keep everybody out. Boundaries teach people where the door is. So I have a lot of children. My husband and I, we're a blended family, and we came together when the kids were really young. Both of our spouses had passed away. So there was a lot going on. We had the grief, but we also had this blending of families, the stress of all of that. And I found that I would be this second person. I'd be limited, like I didn't have good boundaries at all. I was helping. And then suddenly I would become completely rigid and there was a wall. And in time, I learned that that is not effective. And that also is extremely confusing for the people in my family. What's she going to be? How is she going to help? And so the healthy boundaries have to do with taking care of myself enough so that I can help. I've taken care of myself. I've retreated enough. I've had healthy boundaries, and then I can like let people in. So I have had a practice for years of when the kids were younger, I would just go into my bedroom and like I knew they were okay. They were all home. They were doing their homework, or maybe they were, you know, watching TV or something, some sort of downtime. And I could retreat to my room, read my book for 45 minutes, maybe even fall asleep. Like they were old enough that this was okay. And they knew that they could come find me and they knew where I was, but it was my quiet time. And I realized that when I would get up after that, it was like I had a whole new day. So somebody says to me, I don't have time. So forget napping. A lot of people don't nap, but just lying down and reading, you know, just chilling out for half an hour or 20 minutes, you may be taking that time away from doing something. But what I found is I gained at least double the time later on in the day. So I feel like I'm just a cheerleader for, it's really taking care of ourselves. It's mental well-being and it's physical well-being because they're all connected. So this is one of my very favorite tools, to ask these 3 questions. So when I'm heated, before I start to flip out or freak out or freeze or do any of those things, I ask myself, or I try to ask myself, does it need to be said by me? And often the answer is no. Does it need to be said now? Often the answer is no. And then does it need to be said? Often it's no. But sometimes it's yes, right? And sometimes it just needs to be said later. Or sometimes it needs to be said by somebody else who doesn't have this relationship, that I have with the dependent. So this is a quote from Pema Chodron. I think I say her name wrong, but I love it because it helps me realize that I'm not trying to just get through to the other side and have everything be great, because that's not how it works. So things falling apart is a kind of testing and also a kind of healing. We think that the point is to pass the test or to overcome the problem. But the truth is that things don't really get solved. They come together, they fall apart. Then they come together again and fall apart again. It's just like that. The healing comes from letting there be room for all this to happen. Room for grief, for relief, for misery, for joy. And I like that. And to go back, to this metaphor I have for life, which is this canvas, I want there to be room for everything. And I know that the feelings pass, the hard ones pass, but also the good ones pass. And I just want to be awake for all of it. I'm looking at the time. I don't want to go over time here. So this is an old story. I think it's Chinese. It's about a woman who's being chased by tigers. And of course, she's running for her life, and she comes to a cliff and she sees a vine. She grabs onto the vine and she looks down, and the tigers are below her too. And then she sees a mouse starting to gnaw at the vine. And then she sees a beautiful patch of perfect strawberries. And she takes one of the strawberries and eats it and completely enjoys it. I mean, sometimes we can't enjoy the strawberry, but we can at least try to get there. We can at least think about, like, even on the worst days, can I go for a walk? Can I do something that brings a little bit of joy? For me, this is recovery. All right, so this is one of my favorite slides and my wrap-up slide. And Dan Seagull, who is a neuropsychiatrist, very famous, just so amazing. If you YouTube Dan Seagull videos, he talks about these things beautifully. So I've already talked about sleep, eating, and movement, but he talks about focus time. And for me, focus time is work time, or maybe I'm just working on a project. I might be focused on, like, I like knitting and I like mending, and it's this sort of intense focus. It's good for the neurons in our brain. Connection. He uses this term 3G, 2P. And the 3G has to do with connecting with a sense of generosity, gratitude, and what was the third G? I can't remember what the third G was. Sorry, don't know what it is. We'll have to email you. And then 2P is connecting to people and the planet, so nature. But this feeling of gratitude and generosity and connection is super important. And the way we do it is important. And that, to me, the connection of the support group. So I have my family members who I'm really close with, and I have friends who I'm really close with, but I think that connection is important in so many different facets. A support group, a church, a synagogue, whatever your spiritual practice is, if you have one, it could be a different group of people who you're connecting with. And I already spoke about gratitude, but noting is another mindfulness technique that I really like. So when I'm trying to be mindful, which is just paying attention at the moment on purpose, and you're usually paying attention to your breath, you might start getting distracted. You hear something. So instead of getting swept away by what you're hearing, you just note hearing. And you might note feeling, pain, discomfort. But when you note it, it's almost like jotting something down on a piece of paper, and then you can just let it go because you wrote, you noted it. So it's just another technique to bring you into the moment. Alphabet breathing is just a fun one. Sometimes if I'm trying to fall asleep, I can't fall asleep, I'll think of like something, the A starts, I might do animals like alligator. So some of these things are for kids, but I love them for adults too. I use these all the time. The problem with alphabet breathing though for me is sometimes I get so into it, I get really kind of awake. And just simply, and this is in the middle of the day at any time, taking 10 breaths. It is ridiculously hard to take 10 breaths and pay attention the whole time. I challenge everybody to try that maybe tonight. And 5-finger breathing is another breathing exercise, but I really like this one. It's for young kids, but I love it for grownups too. And I teach the teachers about it. It's breathing in and touching the outside of your pinky, and then breathing out, going down, breathing in, going up. There's something about the sensation of touching and breathing that's this really nice connection and brings us right into the moment. So these are actually they're not all of my toolbox. These are some of my favorite tools from my toolbox and how I work my recovery, because I'm always like, the whole idea of the family recovery is improving our relationships. And this is some of the ways that I have learned to do it from many of you who are probably listening now, and also from my work at Caron and my experience with my own family. So thank you very much.